Welcome to Quantum RX, the podcast that teaches you how to move beyond stuck emotions and trauma for mind, body, and spirit healing. I'm your host, Dr. Stephanie Davis. If you've ever been to a retreat, mastermind, or transformational event, I'm sure you've experienced all of the feelings, the alignment, the connection, feeling seen by your peers, finding, your tribe, your people, all of those amazing feelings. And you probably experienced some massive transformation and shifts as well. And I think that this is an amazing experience, but also sometimes it can cause problems and it can cause us to get stuck. And I know this feeling well because, you're in it, you're there, it's giving all of the this is it vibes. And I like to call this feeling the afterglow. And when we're bathing in this afterglow, things are not always what they seem. And we can fall into traps that we might regret later. So in this episode, we are going to discuss the biggest mistake that people make post-retreat or mastermind event and 2 ways to avoid making it. If you're curious as to if you have any stuck emotions or trauma that might be causing your illness, preventing you from achieving your goals, or even just showing up as the best, most authentic version of yourself, I invite you to take my free Stored Emotions and Trauma quiz, and you will find that link in the show notes. So let's dive into this afterglow. And like I said, I know this feeling well. I have been going to either conferences or transformational events and retreats, masterminds, all of that for the past 20 years. And I remember going to my very, very first one that it was functional medicine. And I was like, at that moment, this was 20 years ago. I was like, this is it. These are my people. This is my tribe. And it just felt so incredible to connect with people that really got me and saw me. And this felt aligned with my purpose at the time. And it was awesome because I cultivated those relationships, and I have many of those people are still very, very good friends today, but lots of them aren't too. You will find that when everyone is in that moment of sheer excitement and connection, that, it's a perfect example of how we're all so interconnected because everyone's feeling those vibes. Now, don't get me wrong. If you're at like a transformational or healing retreat or mastermind, sometimes the opposite can happen. And I know I've talked about this before where everyone was having all these massive shifts, but my nervous system was like vibrating and saying, no, this is, we're not doing this with everybody right now. Like, you need to go do some work. Like, I know when I talked about going to the retreat in Canada, that was about a year and a half ago at this point. That's how I felt. Everyone was like, we are connected. I have released trauma. I've released emotional baggage. And then there was me out to the side where I was just like, my nervous system was so just off at the moment that I couldn't be there, in that moment with them because I had lots of work to do and, it's a lot of the inner work to do. So that's also an option. But I would say the vast majority of the time, especially when it's like a mastermind situation or a conference or a seminar or something like that, more often than not, you're positive and you're making connections. You've got a lot of good stuff going on. Retreats usually as well. But like I said, there might be a segment of people who are like, it just brought up all the stuff that you need to address. So today we're going to focus on, the high vibes, the feeling that, the good feelings and the afterglow. So what that number one mistake that people make when they, go to these events is jumping straight into partnerships or relationships that are not a good fit for you personally and or professionally, because we make decisions in the moment that we often regret later, especially if you have a business and now your business or your, we'll say practice too, if you're a health provider or a health coach or, health professional of some kind, we might regret those relationships because they are not aligned, because it's lopsided. You're giving a ton of effort and the other person isn't. That is those are very real problems that people have in these situations. And so I have learned from experience. I can't say that I've had one that has cost me a lot of money, but I have had ones that have cost me a lot of time and energy. And to me, my time and my energy is just as valuable, if not more valuable than money, because, money you can always make again. Time and energy you can never get back. And yeah, it's interesting because I went to, as you know, if you've been listening, I went to a couple of events this year where I was facilitating and leading workshops or speaking, and I made some great connections at them. And it was interesting because we were actually talking about the podcast, and I really only invited people who I aligned with very well to be on the podcast. And it was interesting because out of the 3 people that I invited so far, only one has been on. And that was Matt Schmidt, who, he was on a couple episodes ago. And he was awesome. He and I were very aligned. We kept the conversation going and the connection going. And it was one of those things. I will give the caveat, like I knew he was like a perfect one, but it was also because he and I, like from a, just all across the board, we were aligned on so many levels and our journeys were so similar. If you listen to that episode, we had so many like similarities, but we're also in a very similar place in our businesses. And we also, just once you've done the work, and I'm saying done a lot of the work, when you give your word, you show up. And that is how I view when I give my word to somebody. When I say I'm going to do something, I do it. And I find that a lot of people don't take personal responsibility anymore. And for lots of different reasons, societally, I find that we're trying to make more excuses for that. And that's not okay. And that's actually some stuff we're going to be talking about in some future episodes here, and I'll shelf it for today. But that's a lot of the reasons why. So I'm going to reiterate that mistake is getting into partnerships or relationships that are not a good fit for you professionally and or personally. And how do we avoid this? Because it can be so easy to fall in the trap when emotions are running high, like during the event or even just immediately after event. So after the event, I should say. So let me give you some suggestions. First, when you are at the event, journal or record. I personally like to journal, I like to write things out. So I often will bring if you're watching this on YouTube, a little tiny journal where I can make notes. Sometimes I'll bring a bigger journal or a notepad. I actually got this journal at the event that I was at where I met Matt. It was a gift, and it was, it's really important to have these notes. And what was awesome about that event was during our sessions, they would tell you, in the immediate aftermath, take notes, jot down what's coming up for you. What are the feelings? What are the emotions? What are the thoughts? All of the things, right? And so they were very wise. This was the Rise Up event, by the way. I just want to give a shout out to them because they are awesome. But yeah, they had journals and notebooks for us there so that as we went through each one of the transformational steps, we could write down notes. And I highly recommend that. And I've been telling people to do that for years. Do, notes during the event. Go back to your room, even if people are going out, they're the event's over, we're all going out, for dinner or whatever afterwards. Go back to your room and give yourself a minute to decompress. And when you're decompressing, write down what you're thinking, what you're feeling, what your takeaways were, what the downloads are. That's all really important. And then when you're on your way home, if you're flying and you're on an airplane, that is a perfect time to do it because you don't really have anything else to do. So that's typically when I do it. I bust out that same journal and I start going after all the things that didn't necessarily come to me in the moment, especially after I've had time to kind of disconnect a little tiny bit and then, have some perspective. And then I would also say, go back in the following weeks, check in your journal, see what you wrote down, what still feels right, what doesn't, what's in alignment, get rid of what's not serving you and keep what is going to have you moving forward and, getting you closer to where you want to be. But that's a really, really good way to do that. So I always tell people do it during the event, immediately after, and then in the weeks following up. So do a check-in with yourself 2 weeks later, 4 weeks later, maybe 6 to 8 weeks later too, because you will find that the relationships have changed and you have changed. And so often we make decisions hastily without thinking these things through, and we get into places that we don't want to be. The next, and I would say this is the most important piece of it, is give it time. And that sounds so simple, but in reality, it can be very difficult, especially when you are bathing in that afterglow and riding high on the wave of all of the emotions and everything that happened. And so what I will tell you is there's kind of an A, B, and C part of the give it time. A is cultivate those relationships to see which ones truly align and which ones last, and then ones that don't. Because I can tell you at every event I go to, I meet amazing people. And some of those people, they're wearing a mask at the event. They're showing you what they think you want to see, or they're wearing the mask of their business or the current iteration of themselves. And I'm saying this not to be critical, but all I'm saying is they may not be showing up as their authentic self. And when that happens, it can cause a lot of issues for you down the road, because what if they're showing up as this energetic, exuberant, person, and they're yes, let's do this. Let's have some kind of a connection, either podcast, or you guys might do an affiliate relationship if you have a business, or if you are people who are attending a retreat in the same town, you're well, let's get together or let's start something together. Just be very, very careful of doing that immediately, because what you will see over time is that people may not be what they seem in these events. It takes a lot of time to really cultivate a relationship and establish rapport and trust and all the things that are foundationally good for any relationship moving forward, whether it's personal or professional. So that's one that I would say be very, very careful with it. Take time to cultivate those relationships, because I have seen that too, where somebody shows up and they're super duper energetic. And then all of a sudden you get behind the scenes with them and you're on Zoom calls and they're kind of low and not having a lot of energy. And they might also not, if you guys have it, say you guys are doing something together and you're putting together a project and there's a deadline, maybe they're not meeting the milestones. That happens too. And I have kind of been in that situation as well, where like I said, when I give my word, I show up and the other person may not, and they'll be oh, I've had a lot going on in my life. I will say, especially for women, family and kids are the number one excuse. And I will say I have been guilty of that in the past too. And it's not that that's not valid. It's because you're not managing your time well. And that's something that I'm constantly checking in on myself with too, because I'll be the first person to say, to be oh, I'm busy. And then I check myself. I don't say that anymore. I don't say I'm busy because I've got all this stuff going on in my kids, because it's an illusion. When we want to create time in our lives, we create it when it's something that's important to us, right? If it's important enough. So remember to cultivate those relationships. and this is kind of like a tag team to what I just mentioned, but like, how does that person appear in real life? How do they appear online? Because I have seen a lot of people who their online persona is extremely different than what I, met in real life. And I've also seen situations where I met a person in real life at an event and they were awesome there. And then as I got to know them, I realized that there were a lot of, like red flags and things that I didn't necessarily want to be around, or, just I didn't, they weren't in alignment with who I am and what my values are. So do a gut check there, see in reality, how is this person, how do they appear in real life, outside of events? How do they appear online? How do they treat other people? Because I feel like that's another big one, because I have been, again, in like relationships or partnerships after the fact with different people at different times. And the way that people treat support staff is very telling. If they talk down to people, if they are negative, if they're demanding, if they expect you to read their minds, again, all red flags. And so those are situations where I tend to, walk away from, because, and I haven't had this type of situation in a very long time, but 10 years ago, I can remember a few where I was just like, oh, wow, like this person is not treating other people, very well if they deem them to be kind of beneath them, or, the staff. So that is really a really important thing. Also you can see that on, like, if you go meet somebody for coffee, or if you meet them for like a meal, if you go out to like lunch or dinner or something like that, and see how they treat the wait staff and other people that they interact with. So make sure that you get a real good idea of how this person behaves and how they treat other people. And the last one, and I feel like this one is the most important. And in order to do this, you have to be very, very honest with yourself. And it's checking in with yourself. Have you and your goals stayed the same, or have they evolved? Have you evolved? Have your goals evolved as you've moved away from this event? Because I will tell you, if there was any type of healing or self-growth work, or, just any kind of growth work, you will change and you will not be the same person who attended that event. So it's a big caution. So, I feel like you have to give yourself at least several weeks post event, if not, a month or two at least, to see where you are. Who are you at this moment? Have your goals changed? Have you changed? Are you still in alignment with the people who were at the event? Because what you will see, especially if it is something where you did any type of healing or any type of self-growth work, you will see that there's a lot of different people at different levels that go to these events. And especially the newbies, or the people who are kind of earlier on their journey, they're going to be super excited. And there's going to be a lot that happens for them. But they also, and I saw this a lot after the Rise Up event, a lot of people that I connected with, the ones who I stayed closer with and resonated with, were the people who were much further on their journey than the ones who were kind of relatively newer, or had not done a lot of the inner work, releasing, trauma, releasing emotions, the emotional baggage that's not serving them, taking responsibility for their lives, showing up, when they say they're going to show up. There's a lot of those little things. And the more you do the inner work and grow, the more likely you are to meet these, expectations of yourself and other people when you do join into some kind of partnership at all, like any kind of agreement, any kind of partnership, or even a relationship. It'll be interesting. Like, I always kind of do this. I'll do like kind of a 6-month check-in or a 12-month check-in, and be like, hey, like I did all of this stuff. And who am I still resonating with? Who am I still connecting with? Where have these relationships gone, and which ones have kind of fallen to the side? And it brings up the idea of friendships. Friendships are, and I would say this could be friendships, this can be partnerships, any kinds of relationships, but there's, the reason, the season, or a lifetime, are these, partnerships or relationships or friendships for a specific reason? Because that can be very true and it might be short-lived, and that's okay. Is it for a season of life? Is it for a specific part of your journey or their journey? And that's okay too. And we have to be okay with letting those things go too. And I've talked about this before, about letting relationships go that aren't serving you and or the other person anymore. And then some of them may be a lifetime. Like I said, some of my very best friends in this world are people that I met in the past, like 12 to 20 years. And I even some newer ones too, but very much 12 to 20 years ago when I was going to a lot of these conferences and making a lot of connections with people. And I mean, I have some people that I would call new best friends too, that I have, met in the last several years, maybe 1.5 to 3 years at these types of events too. But I'm very cognizant of, like what I just said. Is it a reason, a season, or a lifetime? And it's okay for these relationships to grow and evolve and change. And sometimes we do need to release these things. So I just want to save you from, making some of these mistakes, because I have had some friends be like, I've made such a mistake. I got into this partnership with this person because we were so excited. And then it ended up being a complete and utter disaster. And that just adds more stress to your life. It adds more stress to your personal and professional life if you're somebody who owns a business. So any way we can avoid these pitfalls, and prevent them from happening, the better. So just make sure you tune into yourself, you're honest with yourself. And if there are things that you need to resolve to get to that next level, you owe it to yourself to resolve them, to do it. Just do the work for you and nobody else. And as always, sending you lots of love until next time.
If you made it this far, I truly appreciate you. Remember, knowledge is just the beginning. Taking action is what truly sparks change. If you're overwhelmed and don't have enough energy to make it through the day, I invite you to book a free 20-minute coaching call with me. It's a no-obligation chat where we can discuss your health goals and how I might be able to help you achieve them. Visit the link in the episode description to book that call. Until next time, keep striving for wellness, and remember, you have the power to not just survive, but thrive in motherhood.